Scab, whenever you're ready.
Ready?
Yep.
Well, I want to welcome everybody back to another episode of Blade Talk with Scab and Joe. I'm Scab. If you're new here, or if this is your first time, which means you'd be new, let me tell you a little bit about Boyz Cutlery. We are a blade review and testing channel. We test knives in the front yard, in the backyard, by the river, in the woods, at Fort Scab, Tongarooga, in the swamp. It don't matter where, we test them. When we're not testing knives, we're riding around hollering at people, talking about life. Those are very enjoyable segments. That's kind of who we are. It's what we do. And if you're not subscribed to us, I sure wish you would. We started about a year ago, got about 600 videos. We're headed to 2,000 subs. So I sure would appreciate a sub from you. Now, before I turn it over to my partner to introduce our very special guest, I've said what we do, but let me tell you what we're about. That simply is 22 veterans a day in this country take their own lives. Vets, I love you. You have a place here. That being said, Joe, without any further ado, take it away.
How you doing, guys? Welcome. That's right. Welcome to Blade Talk. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Joe. I'm from Steel, Forge, and Fire, Sword and Knife. Preferably, I review swords and knives. I have a passion for swords from a very young age. I try my best to give you the best that the market has to offer as far as what's at my disposal. You know, with details, with more of a cinema type of approach, because I'm a career cinematographer and photographer, so I try to give you more of an elaborate type of production. And so, yeah, like Scab said, if you can just, if you guys can sub to both our channels, it would really help us out to grow and just to continue the content that we're doing and that we're planning on doing in the future. So with that said, guys, today is exciting for me because, and I'll tell you exactly why along the way. We're very honored and thrilled to have our next guest on Blade Talk. He is an extremely successful YouTuber. He's an extraordinary reviewer of all swordcraft, and he's a wealth of knowledge. And whether he knows it or not, he is an inspiration to many people on the internet, including myself, okay? He's an all-around great guy, and he is a brother of the blade. So he is the one and only Mr. Matthew Jensen. Matthew, welcome to Blade Talk. Thanks for being here, buddy.
That's a high pedestal, Joe.
You better live up to it on this interview.
Yeah, we'll try not to drop any pennies off and hit anyone on the way down.
So listen, no, it really means a lot to us for you being here today. We have a lot of content, a lot of things to go through. But before I actually go into that and going back to the point of, saying that you're an inspiration to many people on the internet and including myself, I'll give you a little something personal from myself to you. I've been into swords. I've been a sword lover from a very, very young age. But at a very young age, I wasn't able to really collect swords, okay? Actually, one of my first swords was like 35 years ago, and I actually still have it. And I'm going to show you this big, chunky mess. But I'm very happy that I actually still have it and it's hanging on my wall. So around the time of the shutdown, where pretty much the whole nation, was, a miserable mess, I was on YouTube. I didn't even surf on YouTube that much. I happened to kind of bump into your channel. And I said, this is interesting. I'm like, yeah, I'm into swords. I mean, this is great. And just the passion that you kind of you bring to all of your videos kind of shows. And it just got me hooked. And then I started wanting one video. And it's about 2 weeks in and I'm about 200 videos in or something like that. And and I found myself kind of wanting to start getting into the collecting swords again. And it's something I've been wanting to do for a long time. And you really kind of inspired me to get into the craft and specifically katana, which I love. And along the way, from watching you do what you do, and being, knowing that obviously I'm a cinematographer, I can do my video productions and all that stuff. I wanted to try to get into doing the YouTube content creator. And you definitely were a direct influence on me in getting my venture started on my channel. And to be honest with you, I actually, even from my very first videos, I structured how I actually approached doing sword reviews around how you do it because I thought it was perfect. And I just wanted to thank you, for kind of just getting me into that. Inadvertently, you didn't know you did that, but you did. So thank you very much, Matthew. I appreciate that.
Well, you're welcome, Joe, and that's humbling, and I'm glad I could provide inspiration, guidance, something to look at to emulate or to not. Hopefully you're pushing it, and I'm glad that you jumped into the video making, Joe, and I appreciate your cinematographer's eye. It's pushing me to up my game myself and try to. You do little things that I'm like, that looks like it takes a lot of time. I got to be a little less dumb to figure out how all that mumbo jumbo works.
I love it. What goes around comes around, and that makes me happy for you to say that. That's very, very cool. So before we get, I want to start right from the beginning, Matt. I want to start from the beginning with you. Okay. I don't want to know your first steps. I don't want to know when you first did potty in the toilet.
That's the beginning, Joe.
I don't want to go to that beginning. I want to go to the beginning of your passion for swords. What inspired you to start collecting, to get into swords? You remember what your first sword was? Like, just where did it all start for you in terms of your sword collecting?
Oh, okay. So sword collecting start from the very beginning. I got my first sword when I was around 5 years old from my uncle who was in the Marine Corps. Wow. And I always liked them because movies, and my parents were not particularly, there wasn't a filter on the movies I watched. So all those like 80s ninja movies and stuff that maybe I shouldn't have been watching, I totally did. And I remember lots of swords from movies, and I was a kid and I thought swords were cool. And I guess I'm a big kid now because I still think they're cool. But collecting probably started when I got my first real one. And even before that though, I remember getting like the plastic toys. If there was a thing I could get, I'd want a plastic sword or something like that. And, before I got a toy, it was a stick in the yard or in the woods. Right. So as long as I can remember, and actually a little bit before I can remember, I've kind of been enamored with the object. And my aunt, I've asked her to send me a copy because I think it's worthy of public humiliation. But apparently I had a bunch of sword toys and I just would stuff them all down my pants. So there's this picture of this kid that is wearing a diaper and pants, and there's just plastic swords sticking out of it. And in retrospect, I don't know who buys a kid in diapers swords like as toys, because now that might seem strange, but I guess it wasn't in the way back when I was a kid. So yeah, I've had a passion for it, collecting. Depending on when you want to define it, could be then. It could be when I got my first one, and I was like, oh, these are real, and I can get them. And gradually, throughout adolescence, my collection grew, and all of it would be what I would probably define as hot garbage now.
Right.
And then when I was a grown up and had a real job and was like, I'm sick of having crappy things, that's when I jumped in and actually spent some money trying to get something that was good that I could be proud of, and it didn't work.
Totally.
But now I'm here.
Let me ask you on that.
Yeah.
On that, Matthew. Let me ask you on that, and let me jump in real quick. Talking about going from hot garbage to quality. About 2-3 years ago, and same with knives. I bought knives from a convenience store, and I thought they were something else. Well, they were crap. Talk about that first real sword you got, the first one where you're like, oh shit, I'm going to spend this money on it, if you would.
Sure. Well, again, it's all context, right? Like, I think like the first thing I could really, really use was a Brazilian made machete that I got. And it was actually really well tempered, and I stuck it in a fire and ruined the 10%, but I still have it in my garage somewhere. And I use it to whack down trees and fit things in the compost bin. But the first time I spent money on a sword and had like an expectation of quality rather than like, oh, it looks cool. And like I did research and tried to figure out what to buy was a Hanwei praying mantis. And so I was in the market and I was looking for something nice, and a deal popped up at a local cutlery store. Again, I'm dating myself because those don't seem to exist anymore either.
Not really. Not at all.
And the owner of the cutlery store said, hey, there's a deal on this praying mantis, and I'm a thrifty guy, so the deal had me. And then he said it's made out of the L6 steel, and it's this company Hanwei, and I didn't know much about Hanwei at the time, so I started looking in and I started reading reviews, and I started kind of being a lurker on some of the forums and things like that were popular ways to get information at the time, and there wasn't really a lot of information on it. I remember watching a YouTube video about it, and there was a guy showing how it swished around in the air, but like there wasn't, and the feedback seemed okay. So I got the thing in my hand, $1,000 Porter, and I was like, this is, I don't like it. And it's not because it's garbage. I mean, I should be cautious with my words now, because, I don't want to imply that the praying mantis or anything from Hanwei is garbage. And it's not. Expectation versus result, right? It was more cumbersome than I thought it was. The things I could do with my cheaper swords in terms of moving them around and feeling agile weren't the case. And, I've come to find that the L6 steel from Hanwei is a little softer than maybe less resilient than the super steels that it was, at least as, a novice consumer, I was led to believe. So, and it was also kind of high maintenance. I remember there was a little smudge on the Suba, and it had, I don't know if it's a patina or a paint, but it's meant to emulate like a Rokusho patina, which is like like oxidized kind of copper, not oxidized, but some sort of bath is what they put copper in, and it comes out this very deep kind of brown color. And I tried to wipe it off because I saw grease on it, and I wiped off the patina, and it was all smudgy and shiny, and I was like, wow, damn. And so it was bad experience after bad experience kind of there. Hanwei replaced the Suba for me, which was very nice of them. I brought it to the Cutlery store, and they sent it back to Hanwei, and they took care of it. So, I mean, it's not that the company was bad or the sword was bad. It was really that I thought it was something else. And then I was like, all right, I don't want to do this again. Right. So how can I avoid what's happening right now? Because it's at the time, especially, pretty rare for me to drop $1,000 on something and then be holistically disappointed in it.
Oh, so that was actually your first sword. Okay. So it was a premium. Okay.
Yeah. I mean, I would say that was the first in a lot of ways. It wasn't the first functional sword. It wasn't the first sword made out of steel. It wasn't the first katana. I mean, I had like cheaper Chinese ones that I had bought that were $100, and I couldn't tell you the name of them. But the first time I spent money and researched and thought I knew what I was getting, that it'd be the Hanwei praying mantis. And that was kind of the start of my YouTube channel was that disappointment.
Do you feel that your passion for the swordcraft and for katana in general, did that lead you into your training in terms of your sword training, or was that a simultaneous thing? Was that an indirect result, or how did that start?
Sure. Like many kids, I was in martial arts when I was a kid.
Okay.
And I've taken different martial arts in different phases, but I would say my interest in the object probably, I don't know if it came in unison with martial arts, but I would probably think so. I mean, I always say a lot of the equations I put to swords, I put to like cars or something like that, something that is maybe more relatable to people that aren't as enamored with sharp, shiny things as I am.
Right.
But I mean, there's people that like a car and then learn how to drive it, right? You bought a fancy race car and then went to school to learn how to drive fast, or got the experience necessary to operate the machine that you've idolized.
Right.
And I would say that's maybe my case. Rather than being interested in martial arts and then finding a passion for swords, I was interested in swords and then wanted to, learn more about them.
Right.
But every facet of them is, I'm not particularly interested in history. I don't think any history teacher I've ever had would tell you that I was a particularly good student or or attentive even. But the facets around the object, whether it be the martial arts and the ways that they were used, the people that carried them, the history and context of why they were made or how they were made or who made them, all of that I find fascinating, probably because for some, I don't know, goofy, screw loose reason, I'm fascinated with swords. And I think it's fair to say, like, a lot of martial artists probably find interest in the sword through their martial art,
right.
Or historians might be fascinated with a period of history and then learn more about the sword and become interested in it. But I definitely thought just sharp, shiny things were cool, and that fueled an interest in other things.
So it basically started with your fascination with the sword, and then you got into the training. But I understand what you're saying. Most people who are training, have, training in the martial art, specifically Lido and all that, they learn to appreciate the sword more with their training. But you started with that long before you actually started into any type of martial arts training.
Yeah, there's a lot of roads to get, in the seat I'm in, right? And I would just say that the interest in the object came first. And I don't know if that's common or not. People might have been interested. I mean, I'm sure, right? We're all weirdos here. We like swords and knives and things like that. So how you got interested in them, it's tough to say necessarily if it was just the object and the shape or something about it that drew you to it. But I do get the impression from various people in martial arts or other collectors and things like that I talk to that not everyone was just kind of instantly interested in the sword itself. They either came to it through a passion of hobbies or in martial arts or collecting or a culture or history or something like that. So yeah, I don't know. There's lots of hobbies like that, though. I mean, if you collect rocks or something, you might pick it up because you think it looks pretty and you found it on the ground. And then later it fuels an interest in geology and history and how the earth was shaped, right? But those aren't the questions you ask. You first start with a pretty rock.
Right. I guess I'm a weirdo too, Matt, because I share your same sentiment 100%. I love the history of them. I love just everything about that surrounds the whole history of where these swords came from, how they were made, how they're still being made, looking at the details and the work that goes into them. I think it fascinates me 100%. So I'm definitely with you there. Having them in your hand, how they should perform and what balance they should have. So I see that you're able to convey that over into your reviews because your firsthand knowledge, exactly the way they should manage or they should handle, and you convey that into every review that you do. So I think it's great that obviously, with your martial arts training, I think it makes you an even better reviewer for that matter.
I think it makes me at best consciously ignorant, Joe. Like I say that because, yes, I do study martial arts, and so I have a perspective, and hopefully that perspective is valuable. But what I've come to find is that how a sword should move. I mean, if you talk to different schools or even different people in those schools, they have different perspectives on what's more valuable or what's more applicable, and all sorts of different takes. And that's true in every club I've been in, there's always nuance to it. And I think it gets down a bit to splitting hairs, right? When you say how thick should the blade be and the weight and all these maybe little nuances, it's important when you get to sword nerdy stuff and in the very specifics of the hobby, it's fun to debate and it's interesting conversation. But as for a lot of practitioners that are swinging it around and trying to work on different things, a lot of the nuances that I talk about either A, aren't valuable, or B, aren't necessarily applicable. So the challenging thing in reviewing is I know my preferences. I know a little bit about what other people like, just having had conversation with them. But it's tough to cover all the bases, right? Right. I know I don't know a lot of things.
But you articulate it well, man. I obviously shotgunned some of your videos a while back, but you do a fantastic job of articulating what you're doing. That's what struck me. You were able, you walked us through it. This is why we're doing it. You explained it. You said, I'm not an expert, but to some degree you are at this point. That's obvious. And I just wanted to say, though, well, I like to say I'm an expert, and but no, what I'm saying is you articulate it well, and you do a fantastic job. And I think that's what's so relatable about you. You do a great job.
I appreciate that. Thank you, Scab.
Totally agree. Now, Matt, what would you classify yourself as? A collector, a sword enthusiast? What would you call yourself?
I would like my collection to be smaller, frankly. You can maybe see some of the notes behind. Yeah, it's so I do like collecting and learning, but I also like moving to different things, and I don't like having as many as I do at the moment. Enthusiast is probably the right word.
Okay.
I certainly I'm not going to claim to be an expert in anything, but it's not, the sword, how the sword moves, like all of those questions around it and all of the knowledge and various kind of tangents that you can go off on swords tend to be an interest, right? And if it's sword related, chances are it'll pique my interest and I'll want to know more. It's not the same with every topic, right? Swords are a particular interest. I'm not like enamored with butterflies or something. If you mention them, I don't go read about butterflies from 2,000 years ago. But if you mention a sword that I haven't heard of, then I'll go rummaging around in various books and whatnot to see what I can learn about it, or see who makes one, or see if I can pick one up and move it around. So yeah, I think enthusiast is probably the right word.
I actually have the first sword I ever bought. I think it was, I didn't really buy it. It was actually gifted to me, and it's probably about 35 years old right now. It's kind of a wall hanger. It's a blunt blade, but it was damn awesome as a kid to get something like this. So let me try to actually bring it to the camera. It's about 52 inches long. Can you see this?
I can.
This is my first.
I think more importantly, I can't unsee it, Joe.
I mean, I can't even attempt to get this thing totally on camera. Okay. It was made in Spain. I don't know what it is. It's probably like a 440 stainless steel, but it's got like really beautiful like details in the hilt. And it just, for me as a kid at like 12 years old looking at this thing, this was like the coolest thing in the freaking world. And I've kept it. I kept it with me, ever since. And it's heavy. I gotta tell you, this thing is heavy. And, my favorite thing, it's got like a little hidden, it's all rusted now, hidden little knife over here, and this was like my show off sword. And this is really where it kind of all started for me. And, the same thing with you. I kind of started like with the movies, and it kind of bridged from there. But when we're in the topic of swords, Matt, I just wanted to ask you, a little bit about katana, right? Just a little bit. So what is your favorite geometry, like your favorite blade geometry in a katana? And why? It's like for certain cutting mediums, like what would be your favorite blade geometry that you like, that you enjoy using?
I mean, it's funny that you can ask a question with so many words and be so specific, and it still just is like, well, what about all these 1,000 other things? There's elements of blades that I like. And if we're talking specifically about katana, let's see. Which blades do I like the look of the most? I like blades with bohi and a okisaki, or even a chukisaki, but various shapes of kisaki that have properly formed yakote and are burnished and have lots of detail in the polish, and that you can make out both the skill of the smith and the skill of the polisher, and lots of little intricacies, and seeing how they all line up and all that kind of stuff, I think is easy to aesthetically appreciate in a blade. All the different. It's tough to even articulate, really, but you have so many different angles and bevels and things going on, and when you see them all playing together, done up by people that are really competent, then it's fun to see that kind of stuff come together. Like a naginata naoshi, or I can't remember how to actually say it, but kobi zukuri or something. You know what I'm talking about? They're very elegant and interesting shaped blades, and so they're hard to make, and seeing them pulled off is pretty cool.
Yes.
And so from an aesthetic standpoint, I like looking at them from an Iaido perspective. If I'm trying to practice drawing and sheathing a sword, I like having a blade with a bolstered tip, something that swells out slightly at the kisaki.
I love that too. Right.
Thick and deep bohi, because it makes the swishy sound, and I can actually hear it.
Right.
And I can kind of, as a training tool, I find that to be useful. I don't particularly like training with heavy blades either. So lighter. When we talk about geometry, it's less important than having something that whistles. I mean, you could put a duck call on the end of the thing. If I could draw it out from the scabbard effectively and quietly, and then have it make duck noises as I move it, and only the duck noise would appear if I got my edge alignment right, that would also be effective. It's not the swishy sound as much as that it makes it audibly.
Right.
For tamashigiri, in right now, it seems like the most popular and effective way to do that is with a relatively wide but thin blade. So it's, the measurement width-wise is going to be above average, usually 1.25 inches or more, or 1.5 inches or more sometimes, and then it's going to be maybe as thick or slightly thinner as an average katana. So even though one dimension is expanding quite a bit, the other doesn't or is reduced even. If you further that by making it like a Hirazakuri and removing bevels, making it very shallow niku, then you can basically make yourself a very awesome glorified lawnmower that will, in terms of cutting tatami mats, be very, very effective. So if I'm trying to compete, or if I were doing a competition where I'm flying to a place and I'm testing for rank, or I'm competing and I'm working with other people in my dojo, then having the most effective tool that I can for that would probably be something akin to that. At the same time, like if you said somebody broke into your house, which sword would you pick? Well, I'd pick the closest one. But apart from that, like I would not pick a long, wide, thin blade. I'd want something that would be nimble enough to use in corridors and agile enough for me to move, but have enough mass. I wouldn't care if it cuts, because you don't have to cleave a man in two. You gotta nick him and then run away, and he'll do the work himself. So it all depends on the context. Really, I think what I tend to focus on practitioner wise, a lot of people cut tatami mats. A lot of people see that as a medium, and so it's an important facet of what people actually do with swords. And then Iaido, just drawing it around and moving it is another. Water bottles and the like, all of them might have a geometry that's favored. And it's the same with knives though, right? So when you say what's the most effective tool, well, a fillet knife is great for cutting fish, but it's not so great for bushcraft, right? And maybe in capable, skilled hands it is, but certainly if I try to use a fillet knife for just about anything other than its intended purpose, is not so great. I think the glorified lawnmowers, as I call them, the very thin, wide profile blades that are made to excel at tamashigiri are kind of like the fillet knife of katanas, if you will. Right. Like they're very specifically made. It's the funny car. It's made to go, in a straight line, obscenely fast, but it's not gonna run a rally really well equivalently. I know I'm bouncing between analogies, but you kind of get what I'm throwing down. That even within the katana, even though it has what seems like a shape that didn't change for 1,000 years, there's a lot of little nuances to the shape that can really gear it toward doing one thing or another. And so that's why when I try to answer your question more directly, Joe, it breaks my brain.
Different swords for different purposes. In other words, it depends on what you're doing that day, and that's the sword that you like. I got you. It's a perfect answer. It all depends on what you're doing with the sword for that particular moment. It
does, and all of that is also dependent on both my preferences and what I think I know.
Right.
You know what I mean? So other people, I have an Iaido that's 4 pounds. And it's obscenely heavy. Right. And if you want to train with a big, heavy blade, then maybe that's going to be helpful. Some people like to train with one blade, or a blade that's dull, but of equivalent weight and dynamics to what they cut with, so that they're always practicing with the same blade and can really safely test speed and all of that kind of stuff with a dull blade. But when they go to cut, it feels like home. So there's nuances and preferences and all that kind of stuff too. But I think it's fair to say if I do Iaido, I get tired, I'm old, and my wrists hurt. And I like to have something lighter so that I'm not gassed out by the end of class and I can still hold my steering wheel when I go home.
In terms of aesthetics, what sword is the prettiest for you to look at and appreciate?
And I'd say personality. Right. It's kind of like as a cinematographer, right? Like I could take a picture and it could be in focus and it could be clear, but if it doesn't pull at your heart or make you think or tell a story or any of those things, then you kind of toss it away to the side, right? And so I think of, if I'm talking about the artistry of a sword, then I don't think there's a style of hamon that I consistently like over the other, but as I look at it, if I can see the skill of the craftsman that made the blade and tempered it, and the skill of the polisher that brought out those details and kind of puts them right in my face, I would say I tend to like bold flavors in swords, if that makes sense. Yes. Right? Like subtlety, I suck at it, and so I like zazz, like at least 30% more zazz.
Right.
And that's a generic, but I like bold hamons with very visibly defined details and such on them. So some of the subtle nuances that can blend into various patterns in the surface steel, the hata, the things like that, or little subtle changes in hamons. I don't tend to gravitate toward those as much, but precision or character or personality, and kind of a boldness to it. And for people that don't look at a lot of swords all the time, all of those are fluffy words. But to maybe give some examples, if I think of a seguha hamon, which is the kind of straight hamon on a Japanese blade, so that the line formed by the heat treatment is going to be perfectly straight. Well, on that line, you can notice some subtle color changes and shifts. And is it perfectly straight? Because it's really, really hard to make it perfectly straight. And so it's a kind of a testament to skill of both the polisher and the craftsman. If that line looks like it's almost machine made, right? Because these guys, thousands of years ago or 1,000 years ago are working with, the $10 bin, which I'm probably going to like it a lot.
Well, that's because you're a blade guy. Yeah. I mean, you're a straight up blade guy. As far as the Gaudy, this is my pocket knife. So I feel you on the Gaudy. I do have a quick question. I'll let Joe take it back. You were talking about the maker and the polisher. And I watched the documentary. I'm from the South, son. Stay with me. One time. And it was talking about the polisher. Mm-hmm. And this old dude was just high end. Talk about, just for a second, how important that polisher is in the process for a higher end sword.
I mean,
if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. Well, I mean, you can go back historically, and polishers usually had kind of a longer education process than smiths did. And I suppose that might make sense. I mean, historically, maybe a smith needed to pound out stuff so that, wars could happen, and polishers, it's a refinement, not necessarily a necessity to kill the other guy. But they can really bring out all the character in the steel, right? So if you look at some of the examples and you see, a high-res photo of some of the finest made Japanese swords, the little details and the pattern. So how many times the smith folded the steel, and all of these little nuances that are brought out, as well as some of the crystalline structures between the edge of the blade and kind of the spine, and some of those transitions and the various colors and patterns and things that come out in them are largely brought out by the polisher, right? So the smith is putting them there, kind of hoping for the best, and sometimes they polish a window in it. But to really spit shine it, it's done by the polisher.
So the polisher's kind of the guy. Well, in the aesthetics, not functionality, but in the aesthetics, maybe.
They kind of show you what's on, they're capable of bringing out what's in the steel and making it visible to you, right? And the better they are, then kind of the more of the sword you really get to see, and the easier it is, and the easier it is to appreciate. There's also probably some refinement of, unevenness and planes, and making all the little bits finished and perfect. So there's some element that they're doing beyond just making it shiny, right? That's probably an oversimplification. They're making it shiny and smooth and even and crisp, and all the lines that are supposed to be there are precise and clean in a perfect world, right? If they do it right.
Makes sense.
They're sharpening it as well. So the polishing and sharpening are kind of the same thing.
Well, the apprenticeship of a polisher is a lot longer than actually being a smith. That's historically, and even today, you have to have a much longer apprenticeship to be a polisher than even to be a smith.
Yeah, and there's just a little bit of a nuance to it, and Scab, it's unfortunate that you might not have one in your hand to go look at, because it becomes, at least I'm too thick-headed to understand it unless I'm looking at it, right? But if you see a really well-polished katana, right, you've looked at enough steel to see what precise looks like, and so when you see like the transition between the shinogi and the shinogi-ji, where the bevel starts, and you see a line that has never seen a buffing wheel, right? Like some guy was able to grind this on a rock, and it looks like aliens must have created this super precise, very crisp line that looks like it's almost sharp in the transition. Almost looks like it's another edge, but it's where the blade tapers off, or a yokote that's been formed in, where somebody is basically taking a burnishing rod and kind of, it's burnishing the tip basically, but the line is so precise, right? Yeah. You're like, I don't know how you just, I don't get it. It defies logic.
But that's the beauty. The beauty of these swords is the fact that it kind of tells a story, and that's exactly what Matt is trying to say. That it's not the blade contour, it's not the width, it's not the size. It's just the sword as a whole. What kind of story or what kind of feeling he gets from seeing the sword as a whole, and it's the artistic element of it to say this is aesthetically what I really prefer. Or I really love the look of this. I love how everything comes together. And honestly, you show that in your YouTube channel. When you're doing your reviews, you'll pick up like even a production sword and you'll say, listen, it's blade was done well, but just kind of the Suba and then the color of the Ito and it doesn't come together. My eyes just kind of go to that one spot and not the whole sword. And it's just kind of like an eyesore. It doesn't really complement one another. But the swords that do complement, it's like when the sword complements itself with all the finishings on it, you make that known. I mean, you basically really, you really signify that. And I know exactly what you're talking about. I certainly have some
preferences in the aesthetic side of things, but there's things like what color is it, or is my eye drawn, or is my eye focusing on a particular thing and something being maybe bolder. I mean, there's the subjective of it, right? But there's also the simply excellent and kind of quantifiable, like look at the precise line; it doesn't waver.
Right.
It's a big long bar of steel, and somebody grounded against a rock by hand for 300 hours, and in grinding on a rock by hand, they were able to create this line that runs smoothly, perfectly along the contours of the blade. I see nothing but a mirror or glass where I'm supposed to. I can make out all of the details of the surface steel and the way the sword was manufactured. I can almost see how the smith is manufacturing the sword because of the way the polisher was moving things around. So, there's aesthetics that I can certainly convey my opinion on, and then there's just the empirical, like this is done good versus. Right. They made it shiny by putting it under a buffing wheel, and all of those nuances and lines and transitions and the things that you would appreciate and that this sort of is trying to emulate from pieces from history maybe are not there,
Yeah. Well, this is all new to me, so I appreciate you taking the time to explain that.
Yeah, I'm hoping it's helping because,
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
Sometimes I feel like when I explain swords, like I remember I went to the dentist the other day, right? And this is obviously a little off topic. And he takes an X-ray of my teeth, and he's like, well, you see, here's the cavity and and this is why we got to do this and that. And I'm like, I appreciate that you're explaining it to me, but what I see is it looks like a shadow of a cat, and you could just as easily say, "Hey, this cat, it's pissing on your gums," and so I gotta take this drill and drill into your head, and then you're gonna give me money. And I would also say yes, because I guess I'm gullible that way. I don't know, but when you go into the details, and hopefully I'm not talking over you, is what I'm. I'm saying.
Well, I'll go back. Down. I watched a lot of I watched a lot of Joe's videos. This is something that I want to learn, so you're fine. If I need to get my little dictionary out later, I will. But I do appreciate the time with it. I do.
Let me know. Happy to go into more. There's if you get a chance to. Fortunately, Japanese blades are well preserved, and so there's a lot of people with collections. There's sometimes meets or I have not been too shy to just reach out to strangers on the internet and say, I like swords. Can I come see yours? And generally speaking, people in the Nihonto community have been pretty generous with their time and knowledge. And so I've gotten a chance to go see things that I really don't have any right to see, or that you would think would be off limits. And people have been, at least with me, very generous. And this is before anyone might have known me from YouTube or anything, when I was just an average stranger on the internet. So really
need to see and hold and witness a real Nihonto. And that's really where the beauty of the katana lies. I mean, listen, the Chinese swords are great attempts in what they do, and I love them. I really do. There's a lot, and there's some forges that do a lot better job than others. Given that knowing what you know, and you physically own Nihantos, and you also have dealt with great smiths here in the States, Howard Clark, Walter Sorrells, and you've seen, the beautiful work that they do. How would you classify, and again, in general, how would you classify in general what Chinese swords are like in terms of the katana market?
Well, to put it in context, maybe explain it and touch on something Scab noted earlier when he said, had the knives from convenience stores, and now you like other knives and you have an appreciation for kind of the difference, right? It doesn't mean that the convenience store knives don't do knife things good, right?
Right.
Or that they don't inspire, or that people don't enamor them and care about them, and that they don't, take work to make, right? Chinese swords, in comparison to Nihanto, are not quite the same, but share some similarities to that disparity, right? So there's some that are poorly made, but if I take really good examples, and I've been fortunate to have a number of good examples, like the stuff from Ronin or Ryan Sword, or a lot of the pieces that have all of the components that a Japanese sword does, but the way they're assembled is fundamentally differently. They're mass manufactured. There's certainly a difference between mass production swords, the way they're manufactured, and the way a historic and authentic Japanese blade would be. Yeah. Without getting into all the nuances and details of the manufacturing differences and how mass production forges leverage economies of scale and and that process. I mean, there's a very big difference between the two, and the output is certainly different, and so is the cost, right? So do I think they're good? Yeah, I mean, they do sword like things cool, right? You've seen me smash things with them, and they can be durable and sharp, and you can use them to practice martial arts, and all of that stuff is totally doable with an inexpensive sword. And so if that's enough, great, then enjoy your sword. And if it's not, or you want more, or you appreciate the nuances, and more importantly, your budget is going to accept those the cost of those improvements, then great, buy the other one. I think they both certainly offer something, and it just depends on whether it's worth it or not to you. Do you need to have the fastest, most powerful, or most agile card? You need, whatever thing suits your fancy. There's a way to invest way more money in it if you appreciate the nuances and differences and perceived quality. But to a person that goes from point A to point B and sits in traffic going 10 miles an hour, having 800 horsepower under your foot doesn't do a lot. To a guy that doesn't play golf, I don't care what kind of driver you have. All of them are don't do anything for me. So I can't appreciate it because it's just not something I'm into. But hopefully you understand kind of what I'm saying, that I think
totally
they certainly have their place, and it's not for everyone to need to invest a whole lot, because some people just don't care about the differences. It's not that they can't see them, it's just not worth the money.
Right. They emulate it well. Some a lot better than others, but I think they emulate the feeling of actually owning or holding a genuine Nihanto, a genuine Japanese made sword. And I mean, honestly, I appreciate it, because if you think about it, Matt, I mean, if we're talking about, if you wanted to own a genuine katana, I know they're still made in Japan, and there's just certain regulations as far as how you can purchase them and who's allowed to make them, and there's a certain amount that they can make a year. So that's one aspect of it, and that's big money.
No, there's ways to totally get it cheaper, right? And part of it is, what do you want to do with it, right? So if you love the classics of a car, right, you probably wouldn't go buy a pristine example of a classic car and run it into the ground, right? You'd care for it, and it would have probably different expectations and usages. If you're going to swing it at stuff, then arguably an antique would not be ideal for that, for reasons. I mean, I hopefully it's self-evident, but if it's not, there's a lot of them. The point is, though, that you can get an antique sword. You can get them cheap if you want to feel like, if it's just holding it, what do they feel like in your hand? Then $1,000, you can get yourself an antique katana of some kind.
Yeah, an antique one, right?
If you want a modern made blade, so it's polished up and
that's what I was kind of implying.
Doesn't look nasty. Then I would say that probably $5,000. I mean, there's plenty of Shinsakudo or modern made Japanese blades made by competent licensed smiths that are in full mounts and maybe in some degree of disrepair. And I mean that they might have some cutting scratches or some signs of age or something like that for $3,000 to $5,000 on the low end. And it's not going to be a really famous national treasure kind of smith, but it will certainly be made by a competent Japanese smith who studied and has put his artistry into the blade. There's plenty of those types of things around. They're certainly more approachable, but do you care, right? Is that what you want? Do you want something made by that kind of fits the bill of Nihonto? Is that what you want? And if so, then yeah, hopefully it's good news that you can have them for less money, and they're certainly more approachable.
Well, it kind of just makes me appreciate having the ability to, having all these forges in China that actually produce these swords, and it just kind of makes it more available for everyday people to be able to afford a katana, own it, display it, use it, tamashigiri, and it just makes it more widespread in this country. So we're able to actually go out and be able to buy a fairly competent, some more competent than others. I say that all the time because it really does vary with the forges, sword. So I actually appreciate the fact that I'm able to do that and not have, I mean, I would love to be able to own something genuine or an antique or something modernly made, but obviously, if the price fits the bill, I would be there, but I'm not. And most people that are viewing are able to, pick up a sword or order a sword from these Chinese forges and be able to own, something in relation to a katana. And I think that's something that we should all appreciate for the most part.
Yeah, I think the argument of not having it is also counterintuitive. Right. So I think commonly you'll hear people that sympathize with the plight of Japanese sword makers today and see that it's not really an effective way to make a living and that it doesn't really help sustain the craft. And people will argue, if your goal was to have a genuine Japanese made blade, if you wanted Nihonto, why did you buy 5 or 10 Chinese made swords over the course of a few years or several years? Why didn't you just save that money and put it towards, the thing you wanted, the genuine article, and you would then be where you want versus not getting there? And I think that argument is a little disingenuous. Yeah. It's assuming that people don't, I certainly would never own a genuine Japanese sword or have patroned any antique dealers or commissioned any pieces from anyone. I would never have sunk a single dollar into the craft if I didn't get to first have Chinese swords, right?
Right.
If it wasn't accessible and I didn't get to hold them, my brain would have probably flipped over to a different hobby, and that's where my money would go. But because I got to play around and further the interest gradually, the budget seemed more approachable. Right. Gradually, I put more money into the community of the sword, so to speak.
Perfect.
But I certainly wouldn't be a customer for high dollar Japanese swords if it weren't for the cheap ones first.
Exactly.
And I still patron both. I still like them both. A lot of people don't necessarily do that. They'll maybe pick a direction. But I certainly also have an appreciation for the fact they exist. I wish that they were maybe a little bit more straightforward about what they're doing, because it's again, it's disingenuous to call a Chinese-made reproduction sword that isn't based on any historical sword sitting in a museum, or it's off kind of a loose interpretation of what Japanese swords are, and they kind of hold a generic shape, and they slap together pieces in a way that isn't historic, but kind of represents the thing, and largely does similar has similar end uses, and then some call it Nihonto or call it a geometry that it isn't, or say it has features it doesn't, or hyperbolize its capabilities when they shouldn't. So there's give and take, but largely I agree that I'm glad that I can buy a $50 sword And I would encourage everyone to buy what they can in their budget and then fuck it up, right? Like, go do your dumb shit, right? Do it with a $50 sword. Hopefully your budget is at least that, because that's about the cheapest katana that I've found. And then you realize they break, and that it's way less disappointing to break a $50 sword and bend it and screw it up than it is when you spend hundreds or thousands of dollars on something. But yeah, you get a feel for if it's a good thing or a bad thing. And I think that just as a training tool to get your dumb, get the dumb out of your system, it's worthwhile in and of itself.
Perfect.
How long would somebody have to wait, Matt, typically on a say they wanted to go and get a modern sword from like you said, a Japanese maker that maybe is up and coming? How long a wait for folks who don't have katana, if they wanted to go that route? How long would they have to wait typically?
I don't know that I could honestly answer the question. I imagine everyone's queue is a little different. What I can say is, like, today you can go to dealers and buy existing pieces, and they're on the market, and they're in the $3,000 to $5,000 range, and they're not going to be any museum treasures, but they'll be, good stuff. And if you want to commission a blade, then you don't generally just have one person doing the work, right? So a person like, Walter Sorrells might be several months or several years. Polishers in Japan, depending on who you want working on your stuff, may have queues of, months or years.
Sure.
It's been a while, but I recall hearing stories of people that had, queues for polishing that were 5, 10, or, some people waiting decades to get their swords back. So it depends, but if you don't care and it's the real thing that you're after, then there's stuff you can buy now, and you can probably find somebody that's capable of doing the work. But they take time to produce and get out. So I'd imagine that your expectation, if you found someone willing to go right now, should be somewhere between 6 months and a year.
Okay.
If you factor in like design and talking, and then finding the people who are going to do the rest of the work, because you got a guy that's going to pound out the pointy stabby part for you, but somebody's got to polish it. Somebody's got to put it together in all the little fittings. You got to find somebody to make those little fittings so that the next guy can assemble it into a final sword. Right.
Okay.
And all that can take time. I pretty rarely have a project that, like, if I have nothing and conceive of it and move forward, generally they take me 2 to 3 years to finish. Sometimes I can hodgepodge something together quicker, but they're usually pretty long for me.
Yeah.
Like if I look at like a knife or something like that, it seems more common that the people that make knives also make the handles and temper the steel themselves and do all that. Yeah. So a person making a traditional Japanese sword may not, make the steel themselves. They might, but generally they get that from somewhere else if it's finished. So, when's steel going to be available? Then the guy has to make the sword and put it together, and probably needs help to do it because there's a lot of hammering, especially if there's no power hammers involved. And then you got the guy that polishes it. You got a guy that makes the habaki. You got a guy that makes, maybe all the fittings, like the cross guard and the pommel and the, little cap that goes on top of the handle. You got another guy that makes the cord that goes on the scabbard called the sageo. You got other companies that make the ito that it's wrapped around, and all of there can be a lot of hands involved in making a traditional sword. Not that there has to be. There's people, I know you interviewed Walter Sorrells not too long ago. He can do it all if he wants, right? But equally, you could totally have somebody that does each step in the process themselves.
But typically, it's not a one-stop. See, again, this is fascinating to me, and I know Joe probably want to take a break, but this part is fascinating to me. Even your higher-end knife guys, like if you get a Randall, you're waiting 6 years, but it don't take them 6 years to craft. The lines, like you said, the queue's that long. So I appreciate, again, you taking the time, because and I hope this isn't too elementary, and I'm sorry about that.
No, not at all.
But again, this is brand new.
I don't know that I'm qualified to speak for like the industry as a whole, but it can go quick or short. And a lot of times with Japanese swords, even today, like if I buy a Howard Clark blade or find one, secondhand somewhere, which is typically more my speed, there's a lot of hands that go into the work.
Right.
Okay.
Regarding your YouTube channel, I know you mentioned it a little bit before. I know the whole story, but I wanted you to kind of go into what led you to actually make, or what led you to actually want to make your first YouTube video.
Sure. There's a few different parts, right? So there's making sword reviews, right? And I would say that the part that I touched on earlier, which was the praying mantis sword, prompted me to get into reviewing and collecting. And I kind of started thinking, hey, if I can buy a sword from somebody used and not lose more than $20 on it, and it'll help me figure out what I like in a sword, who's making good ones, and then my next purchase that I want to keep will be a lot more informed, right? Because that's just the tuition of this hobby, or at least the smartest way I could find to do it, because no books, no advice that I was reading online was making me not spend something what I thought was a meaningful amount of money on something I didn't like. So as I got more and more swords, I then would post written reviews, and there's a couple of them on Sword Buyer's Guide that I put out there that are, my first attempts at doing kind of written reviews. YouTube, the first one was a Ronin katana destruction test, I think was the first video that I made. And so I asked a guy at work to give me a hand who had a little bit more experience video editing and the like. And so that's why it probably is a little different flavor than some of the other videos, because I had help with my first go. And Ronin Katana sent me some swords, and I had bought a Ronin Dojo Elite. It's one of the few blades that I bought in brand new, full price kind of thing. And I'd provided some feedback on, hey, here's what I thought about it. And it was thorough enough to have the owner offer me a sword for the time. I think I sent him like a 40-page novel of,
right.
of feedback. Anyway, the point is that I said, hey, I'd like to test swords if that's okay. I don't want anything for free, but if I could be on the short list of people that smash things for you, that sounds like a hoot. And I hadn't done it before, and I hadn't made a YouTube video before, but I had reviewed a couple swords, and so I got the sword, and you can kind of see the video online. It's been a while.
I've seen it. I've seen it actually many times. Yeah. Yeah.
But that was the first video, and breaking it was fun. I don't know how informative it was, but it certainly was fun, and it showed that the product was pretty durable, especially in novice hands trying to smash rocks with it and stuff. And it was a hoot. So from there, Ronin actually proceeded to give me most of the samples early on that I got that I was destroying were from Ronin, but I started reviewing other swords that I had in my collection and liked. And so that's, I started with the ones that I liked. I think the bamboo mat was probably my second video. It's also one of my favorites, if not the favorite. And so then I started doing it, and people initially I kind of was jokey about it, and I'd drink and, talk in my movie voice or something. And
the drunken reviews.
Yes,
they're labeled the drunken reviews. Actually, they're very good. Yes,
I can do the movie guy voice. And anyway, but people were like, "Can you stop it?" Because I don't really like it when you just blurt obscenities into the microphone. And what you have to say is helpful. I just find it difficult to listen to you say it. So if you could kind of tone it back. So that's when I guess I'll just talk at the camera started. And so, then I just kept doing it. And as I kept doing it, I got more of my collection, and like, I suppose just other cool stuff started happening. And I don't just mean like the free stuff, like have this sword, review it. And it's still humbling every time somebody lends me their property to play with, or a vendor is like, hey, have this sword and tell us what you think. Like that's awesome. Right. But I learned a lot. People would say, have you thought of this? Or you should check out this book, or here's a place you can go to see more stuff. Or, I've met a lot of people in person, and people have been very kind and generous with their time, knowing that, I ramble about them on YouTube, and they've seen me and know that I have a passion for the subject. So it's opened some doors, and it still remains fun. So that's I guess what brings us to here. Now I'm on with Joe and Scab. And
now you've made it.
Now
you're in the big time, Matt. Now you're definitely in the big time. Skip, did you want to add anything to that? I know you had.
Well, here was my whole thing, Matthew, with that, and you did a great job covering it. I was just going to kind of ask you about the evolution of your channel, which you just discussed, and did it well. going from video one to now, obviously this is not what you envisioned. Okay. And you said you had to make a conscious choice to taper it back. And you said you learned things. And I think anybody that does YouTube, I've done this about a year. And my first video I sent to my son, he said, Dad, you got to do this, 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 and this. You know, he was in his 20s. Well, I said, okay. Well, whether it be conscious choice or just learning like you did, I've done this, 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 and this. Talk just a little bit more about just a little bit more about the evolution of your channel. And is this where you want to be, or do you have designs on something further?
Sure.
We go into that a little bit.
All right. Well, I can totally do that. So I think I covered maybe the spirit of, you know, a little bit of why and some of the fun and like maybe personal motivations. In terms of conscious choices that I've made to evolve, it has been certainly like, don't be drunk all the time, right? It's not all comedy. Some people, and I always think of the main purpose of channel is to inform somebody to help them spend their money, right? To solve the problem that I had with my praying mantis and spending $1,000 and not really liking it. So what can I provide? Because it seems like having a lot of hands-on experience and a camera is enough. There's just not a lot of people in the space doing it. As I look at the other passions and hobbies I have, there's tons of people that are informed and eloquent and frankly do say all the things better than I would. But with swords, it didn't seem like that was the case. And so I thought I would try and contribute to the conversation. And since that was the goal, right? If I'm having fun, you know, cursing into the camera, then I'm not really doing what I set out to do, even though I'm maybe having a little bit more fun with it.
Right.
So that's where the conscious choice came in, is help the most people. And if right. I'm getting in the way of that, then I should just get the hell out of the way. Right. So there was that. There's been other things, though, and most of them I would say have been technical, learning to video edit more, learning different software to make the videos better, getting different camera equipment that that I know how to, and learning how to operate this stuff. Even though I still fail at that plenty of times, I forget to hit the record button, or I zoom my camera in to show a close up and then forget to zoom it back out and lose, you know, what's going on. It's not that I'm infallible by any means, but a lot of it has been how to make it more watchable. And I found that, like, as I go back or as I consume content from other creators, you know, there's an appreciation for kind of the low budget realism that another person just filming from their cell phone gives you. But sometimes it's tough to watch, particularly when you want to see like some of the nuancy, nerdy details and things. Right. So, I Joe knows I'm not particularly self-aggrandizing in my level of knowledge, but I generally think that if you just mute me and don't listen to a damn thing I have to say,
you'll enjoy the pictures. Right.
Job,
you always say
like,
that.
I should be able to show you something meaningful in the video, and I've tried to do that to the best of my ability.
Yeah, I said that same thing in a video. Turn it off, even though I have melodious tones and amazing good looks, and the knife will speak for itself. Right. You know, so I 100%. I appreciate that.
The final part, which is where do I want to go in the future? I don't want to go anywhere. Like this is pretty much the end game for me. I'm going to talk about swords, and I'll look to other ways to engage with people. People have asked me, you know, to do different things, and so I'm trying other content that maybe I stretches me out of my comfort zone, but it's in the same spirit, right? So I'll continue to review swords, but if my opinion seems valid and helpful in the same vein on another topic or on another platform or another thing, then that's kind of my next step, but probably still very sharp and shiny thing related. I'm probably not going to cover underwater basket weaving or anything.
That's a good thing.
So my own opinion, Matt, as far as the evolution of your channel. Now, watching, and I've seen all of your early videos, and watching your early videos. I'm sorry. It's okay. It's all right. No, but seriously, the detail and how you convey what you're feeling about the sword and how the sword should be, and the good points and bad points in the sword, I don't think that ever pretty much changed. I think your approach is pretty much exactly the same from early days to modern days. My interpretation of the evolution of your of your videos is the fact that I know you started with the GoPros, you started just like putting on GoPros and put them on in a wide angle and kind of and the audio was kind of all over the place and stuff. And now it's like, you know, everything is much more refined. I remember making comments, you know, in the very beginning. I says, man, maybe you should like get like a lavalier mic or something like that, or because I couldn't barely hear you or something like that. And then you just started kind of just refining the quality of your work. You started editing it a lot more. You put a couple different effects. I know you experimented with effects here and there. So I just think the evolution of your videos from video one to now, I mean, I look at your videos as extremely professional, very detailed, very good quality in terms of your close-ups, being able to see the fine details of the sword. That's the only evolution I see in terms of your channel. Your approach has been the same from day one. So I commend you on that. I mean, you made big strides in terms of how everything looks, you know, and sounds. I mean, coming from a cinematographer, I appreciate that. I says, you know what? I love it the way, and I made it. You made those comments a million times. I said, Matt, wow, your picture looks great today. What camera are you using? In fact, the funny thing is, when we speak, I think we end up talking more about cameras and photography than swords.
Yeah,
you know, when we're speaking together. Yeah,
yeah. It's certainly a journey, you know, and there's still a lot to learn. But I've gotten it to a point where I feel like it's more watchable anyway, or at least hopefully people wouldn't see the content and be kind of immediately dissuaded by struggling to actually see what I'm talking about, you know, and not that I, you know, don't have miles to go before it's maybe where I want it to be, but it's certainly several steps forward, and it's a lot. There's a lot to learn about recording and angles and lenses and blah blah blah. It's its whole own thing, right. And my brain is too full of sword stuff to really absorb it all. But yeah, it's a struggle, and the format has remained pretty consistent because it's really like I'm talking about the same kind of thing. And when you go top to bottom and try to cover every aspect, you know, like. You find a plan, but there's really not more to add other than like poetry.
The first video that I watched from you, you broke a sword. Okay, I test knives, got it. What stuck out to me was you were like, damn, I didn't even hit it on the spine. And it clicked with me. He meant to do it. And then I kind of watched and I couldn't stop smiling because now I'm watching a guy actually test something, not review something, test something. So I was happy about it. And just to go back to touch real quick, I am a history guy, but that didn't facilitate my love of knives. I think a lot of us, like you said, the weirdos, I ran around as a kid with a pocket knife. You know, I just think it's innate. What I wanted to ask you, though, is I know my reaction to the first time watching you break a sword. Talk a little bit about that, because I know some of these guys, man. Some of them you've desecrated the Holy Grail and all that. Did you get a lot of blowback from that?
I wouldn't call it a lot, right? Especially, you know, there's certainly people that were frustrated, and some people voiced those frustrations eloquently, and others did not. So, yes, I would say, though, that it continues to be feedback that watching me break something that somebody conceivably could enjoy, for whatever reason I choose to do it, is bad, and they don't like it, or they don't think it provides value. But I contrast that with the feedback I get about people finding value in it. So if I saw more unanimous consent that like breaking a thing doesn't provide any context, information, help, or, you know, if I even subtract the entertainment, like if it didn't give people a perspective on things, I'd be kind of inclined to stop doing it. But
right.
Well, some people seem to say it's pointless and there's nothing to be had. Other folks, and not all of them, just, you know, novice. I'm the first video they clicked on that had sword in the title. But, you know, seasoned practitioners seem to find some value in it. So I feel like at least to some, the breaking is helpful. And to others, hopefully there's value in the going over before I break it. The first experience is certainly illuminating, not knowing, like the first time I broke a sword, I had never pushed anything intentionally to failure. I mean, I'd bent swords and I had, you know, things problematically happen, but I'd never intentionally pushed it to failure. And so doing that as an exercise was, yeah, you certainly got to feel for it right away. Like, these are not indestructible objects, and it is. I need to be careful, and like an inherent sense of danger. Like, oh, I could kill myself. I should. Gradually, you've probably seen me step up safety a little bit. even though that's somewhat lax. But yeah, suffice to say, I wouldn't call it like a bell going off, but striking a sword and like having it vibrate and try to jump out of your hands, or bend, or like cut deeper, quicker, better than you expected it to, and you're pitching that sword right toward your leg because you're cutting over your lead leg. All of those things have provided like a sense of danger, and like remember to respect the object, and two, that it can break, and to be careful and expect that at any time. The sword buzzing past my head certainly put the fear of God in me on that one. So there's a lot of little lessons and nuances to be learned, but there's been a lot of kind of martial application fun that's been learned as well. Clashing two swords together, edge on edge, and feeling how they bind together is not something a lot of people get a chance to feel, because It's expensive and you're going to screw it up if you do. So there's nuances to that, or feeling what it's like when a blow goes bad, right? And how it deflects and things like that are educational. I don't know that would make me better in sword-based warfare, but it's entertaining and educational.
Well, I think it provides a safety factor too, because what you're doing is you're saying, look, this can break, and there's a lot of folks who go out there, whether it's sword, not whatever, and don't take that into consideration. So when you do it, and you're doing it for a service, I mean, so I just know how some folks are. And the edge on edge stuff, all that to me is fascinating. And yes, it provides something. It tells me, hey, dumbass, don't go do this and hurt yourself. No, seriously. I mean, you're providing a service there. So, I appreciate you answering. And that was just kind of I just know how people are. They're oh my God, let's bow down to the throne of steel like they watched Conan 700 times. And so I was just curious there if you faced a lot of reverb.
Yeah, there's certainly been people that have been very vocal about their disapproval of breaking things because whatever reason, breaking it when somebody else could be enjoying it is painful, and I get it. But hopefully, there's fewer broken swords out there in the world as a result of it.
Sure.
And hopefully, people can see, like to your point, that they can be dangerous. Joe, I'll see if I can send you the clip of when it was one of the earlier swords that I tested, but I put a piece of sheet metal to see how it would cut through sheet metal on a sword stand. And it was loose sheet metal. So when I struck into it, it like pitched up. And when the sword broke, it kind of slingshot.
Do you remember which sword it was?
It was a Ronin Katana 1095 hammer made. The basic gist is that this sword, I was expecting it to break. I thought like, hey, the edge will dull. I had broken a few swords at this point, and based on, I want to say I thought I knew what I was doing, but more importantly, I had some expectations about how they broke and when they broke, and they didn't fly back at my face, right? So I tried this test where I had and test is a very loose term, right? There's no scientific method here, so I'm using that, not from an engineering standpoint, but I was bashing it into a piece of metal to see what it did to the edge or see if it bent. And what happened is it exploited a crack, and the metal pitched, and the sword, instead of kind of pitching forward, got flung back at my face. And in this little clip, you can see that the sword pitches, zips past my face. It incidentally landed and was sticking out of the roof of my shed behind me. 50 feet behind me. So it had some force on it, and it breezed past my head. I want to say it was, it wasn't inches away. The video, because it's not very good, makes it look like it's, shimming hairs off my head or something. Not quite. It was about a foot away, but that's pretty close. And you can see it pitch blade first right at my eyeballs. And I'm wearing safety glasses, like that's going to stop it. And it zips past my head, and you see this reaction. Like just seconds later, right? Like I'm dead. I'm on the ground twitching if this thing hit me. And I'm looking like it was a second later. I'm like, it's comical to see the delay in what it would take to react to something like that, because it was a Shatner-esque level pause.
Oh, right. That's a great analogy.
Kind of my final question with you would be this, and you even just said it. Do you have you developed a feel where, hey, nobody knows when something's going to happen, and I understand that, but do you have kind of a knack, or have you kind of developed a knack for knowing, hey, this thing's about to go? Or are they all just, oh shit?
Yeah. I would say what I have is a recipe, and
Right.
I'm trying to follow it to some degree, and there's some expectations. But when you don't know about the ingredients that you're putting in the recipe, and you can't control really the temperature of the oven, right? There's a lot that can really go awry. And so, I would say that's the best way to describe it, is that I'm trying to follow some steps, and I do have some expectations, and I kind of know that, hey, I put the sword through its paces and what it should do, kind of do some stuff that arguably it shouldn't do, and then go well into the territory of stuff it definitely is not made to do, and where any reasonable person is going to expect it to break, right? And then I deform the edge in such a way where, hey, it's holding up, and then basically you flip it around and hit it on the other side, and any damage that you made is going to be exacerbated, and it's going to split those cracks open and make it much worse. So that generally is the recipe.
Right.
At
what point it fails in that is I suppose what I try to find out each time.
So the spine whack then exploits the weaknesses that you've already put in, knowingly put in, and then that's just kind of the coup de grace.
Right.
Okay.
Well, I appreciate the fact that you've become more informed from doing your tests, on the swords and how they break, because you, in your more recent, breaking videos, you make the comment. You say, listen, it should break if I do this. And then if it doesn't break when you do that, that's more of a testament on the sword. And you actually make that comment. So I think you evolved to the point of doing this so well and doing your own experimentation that you know exactly when the sword should break. And if it doesn't, again, you commend, the quality of the sword if it doesn't break at the point where most swords do. And I appreciate that. And I've seen that evolved with you, within your videos. And that's definitely a great point as far as what you're making there.
I've gotten a little better feel for it.
Definitely.
When it shouldn't be as sharp. I've gotten better at telling when it's sharp and when it's not.
Right.
And I think initially I didn't have as much of an appreciation for the difference between hair popping sharp and paper cutting sharp, and can, still cut your jacket sharp, and then like you can rub it against your skin, but if you press really hard sharp, it'll cut you. And then the gradual stages, I've had some appreciation to perceive the subtle differences between each of those steps. And then, when it inevitably croaks or breaks in half, something to expect there. But I keep changing it too. The Croquet Steak of Doom is a somewhat new star on my channel. It's replaced Anathar, and
oh, did it?
And hopefully it's more analogous because it's a medium steel and it's soft, and so it's not just edge on edge contact, somewhat early in the game, but even introducing kind of a rounded steel peg, those things fly back at me, right? Like it's moving in ways that I didn't predict and that didn't happen the same way when I struck it against, a sword braced in a barrel or something. So there's always more to learn.
What do you base your katana reviews on? Like, how do you determine how a katana should be built, how it should look, how it should perform? Like, do you have any swords in your possession that you base your reviews on? For the katanas on your channel, or do you base it on historical swords or nihantos that you may have had in your possession? And also, how important is the price factor in your decision of what a katana should be?
So there's a lot of factors that go into it. Price, you touched on one, is a real big one, right? Because I think that certainly can set an expectation or at least a reasonable one. There's also what was intended, right? Is this if I look at a company like Albion and I say, hey, you got your museum line of swords that are supposed to recreate exactly a piece in a museum, or be the intent of what that piece was in its original state, or even a more modern, refined state. Are you representing both the spirit of that artifact and recreating it accurately? Well, that's what it's sold as, right? So are you meeting that intent? Are you meeting what you're advertising to your customer? If it's a next generation piece from Albion, that's like an interpretation on something you might find, but not specifically a piece from history. But it's supposed to represent something analogous to the typology that they are advertising it as, and being a good sword at the same time. So there's that, right? You can see when I did the Dark Sword Armory review on an Alexandria, I compared it to other Type 18C swords.
Yes.
And I noted the differences that, this was, and I had somebody smarter than me come on and maybe articulate a little better if those were historically accurate or not, because it's supposed to be based on a historical thing. Alternatively, swords in China, they're not really based on any particular thing in a museum or anything like that. So I don't really touch on it, but people might use them for practice. They might use them for cutting. So I touch on those things and how well it does based on my own understanding, having handled a lot of different swords. But yeah, I certainly factor in price, and I generally speaking, I'm pretty forgiving on it though. Right. So I'll let you know that, like, if a sword says, hey, I'm a decent sword and I cut stuff decently good and I cost $200. If I feel like they're advertising the things and then give you what they advertised, how competitive it is a factor, but I don't get down to the $50, $25 differences between manufacturers. If it is what's advertised and is in the ballpark of similar things, then usually I say, like, hey, I'm content to say that they're not ripping you off. And then, whether I like it or not. If somebody were charging, like if I found a $200 sword and they were charging $2,000 for it, it would probably be a different comparison, and it'd just have to offer something unique, different, or special, and hopefully it
right.
hopefully it would. But it's all very nuanced and subjective. So I do my best to explain where my biases are and my thoughts are, and people are very often disagree with me, and that's good.
Okay. Totally understood. So has your increased popularity made it difficult for you to keep up with the demand of doing your reviews, and also the increased number of comments, with all the followers you have? So how does that kind of fall into all that?
And you're trying to get me to be succinct, Joe. This is, you're going to kill me. Gratifying. I mean, when basically I meet the goal, right? When people say you saved me money, or I learned something, or you've helped, that's great. And people that go out of their way to throw in a kind word about how it helped, or why it helped, or what it provided, or to drop some knowledge on me. All of that I find really good. And YouTube, as you both know, can sometimes be a thankless job given how much time goes into it. So when somebody goes out of their way or trusts me and sends me their stuff, or lets me play with their own investment, all of that I find humbling and gratifying. And so that's pretty cool stuff.
Definitely.
What's painful? Editing, I've talked about some of the creator challenges and finding time. I mean, when I'm not in the mood to make a video, but I got a stack of swords behind me that need videos created for them, and I'm not in the mood, the lack of passion comes through. So finding the right time and some of those creator challenges can certainly be good, because I want to talk about it when I want to talk about it. Right. That can be a challenge, but like, to go more towards the comment side and managing that, it's harder to keep up, especially as different audiences are introduced to the content and have different questions and different things. The most irritating is certainly like, what's the best sword for $500 with zero context, because it breaks my brain. There's 1,000 questions to ask. And one time I think I listed out like 50 questions. I can't even remember how many there were, but like, how tall are you? Are you studying this? Do you care? What do you care? And nobody answers them. They ask a very broad question, like, what's the best? And I'm like, well, I don't know. All of them. And more than that, it's more irksome, because the person asking, I think there's a pretty strong chance that they don't care. Like if you're asking me very nuanced questions and I equate it to the cars again or something, and I'm like, what's the best, da-da-da-da-da-da-da. Like, are you going to notice the difference between an Accord or a Camry if you drive from point A to point B? And if you couldn't tell me which one's which by looking at them, like if you don't know those things and you're not kind of in the weeds, is there really going to be a difference to you in the end? Don't waste any more of your time. You spend your time on your job, make some money, buy a sword, swing it around, have fun with it. You're not going to, it's not it's not meaningful to you. So I think that's probably the irritating part, is I'm incapable, as you're finding out right now, of being succinct. And people ask me very broad questions and it's hard to answer. And then I'm like, okay, well, I've answered this comment for an hour and a half. I have 800 more.
So I wanted to get into the humorous side of Matthew Jensen. Now, I personally think that all of your videos are funny. because you have a certain dry sense of humor about you, and you're not trying to be funny, but you are. You just come along as being very entertaining and your normal personality. But in specific, where you're really trying to do like a spoof or something funny, like the April Fools, can you tell? I mean, I don't know. A lot of people wanted me to ask you about Anathar, and how did that come about? Why did you make that video, and why did you make a part 2?
Okay. So the funny side, I think a style of humor which is quite dark and also dry. Like old man can't wet the roof of his mouth dry. Really, you probably have to. It's an acquired taste, so to speak. And I don't know how well it ages, and more importantly, I don't know how much it really distracts from what I'm trying to do. So my humor might come through, but I'm a pretty jovial guy in person. I'm probably more of an asshole in person than you might expect. I tend to have frenemies, right? Like I give people lots of shit all the time, and I can take it, and it's funny, and it's anyway. That's my style of communication with the people I happen to know in real life. And so if it can come through on camera, and great. But generally speaking, I think it distracts a little bit. So that's maybe why you don't see it as much. I try to make sure the usefulness comes through first, and hopefully a little bit of me along with it. Right. On the rare occasion that I do a drunken video, maybe I'll do another one, or the Anathar videos. Those are just fun.
No, Anathar's power can't be contained. For no one in this world can you trust, Faith Man. Not men, not women, not beasts. This you can trust. It's a sword.
Dad, you need therapy, not swords. You have trust issues. That's why Mom left you.
I was swinging Anathar earlier, and its power couldn't even be contained by the silly plastic handle that it's made from. Anathar, Sword of Power. This, my YouTube friends, is the Sword of Anathar. Made by Kid Ray, or at least designed by him. Stamped out by some machine in Taiwan. It's the most amazing sword there ever was. Why? Look at all those fucking spikes. It's got runes on it that look like ruins. It's also the strongest sword imaginable. Hear that? Yeah, that dull thud can chop through a tank. Yeah. Oh. Well, it just kind of exploded in my hand. That's not good. That hurt a lot. Break an Anathar? Is it take an Anathar to make an Anathar? Do I sacrifice my firstborn daughter? Do I give in to those extended car warranty calls I keep getting? Is unobtainium a thing? Do I need a sword made of unobtainium? Is Anathar made of unobtainium? Anathar.
No, you're dumb. You just have to go hit it on a rock or something.
A rock made of unobtainium?
No, a rock made of rock. Or a bar made of...
Bars.
Metal.
That makes more sense. I think the bars are still closed.
Good Lord, how are you functioning as an adult? Just go do your thing. Smack it haphazardly on a rock or an object of your choosing.
Well, that's anticlimactic, but I guess. Wait. How can I wield that which cannot be wielded?
What?
The handle's broken.
Tape?
Tape?
The magic stuff that you use to fix everything. Broken pipes, bad hair day, your marriage.
Anathar. Oh, duct tape. Why didn't you say?
I all the kind of garbagey swords that I had from when I was a kid that were, varying degrees of real, I gave away. And I got rid of them because I have too many of them as is, and things that I both didn't want to break and that you couldn't buy and that were not to my collecting style anymore, I thought would be more effective just to part with. But I did have Anathar, and LG Martial Arts, Lewis there gave me this this Anathar blade on SBG. He had one. I was like, yeah, I'll take it. I can probably do something funny with it. And it sat around for years. I kind of felt bad that I never did anything with it. And I was going to do some sort of review, but come on, if you like Anathar, cool, but you're not buying it, chances are to be in the same vein of things that I review as a functional sword, and hopefully that was clear. So I thought I'd do something funny with it, and kind of on a whim, I just went in my basement and recorded a random Anathar video, which I didn't break the sword though. So that prompted part 2,
the curse,
where the next April Fool's.
The curse.
It's like, well, it wouldn't be right if I didn't,
right.
do my shtick with it. So that's where that came from.
So guys, if you're watching this and you're not subscribed to Matthew Jensen, you're doing something wrong. But specifically, if you are going to be a new subscriber, check out those videos of Anatar. You really enjoy them. I enjoyed them a great deal.
So my favorite, as in stick it in the ground with me, is the Hanwei bamboo mat that I've remounted. Bear in mind that the one I have is just in the blade alone, in comparison to other Hanwei bamboo mats that I've owned and measured against it, is substantially heavier than any other one that I've seemed to have. It's a bit of an outlier in terms of the bamboo mat. So the one I love is probably a bit different than what you could go buy today, which are lighter. Most people might prefer the one that's available today. But anyway, I happen to like that one. And I had it bedazzled and redone for my birthday some many years ago. And your dogs apparently disagree with me.
Yeah.
I still really like it. So I don't care what your dogs say.
Hold on, let me get rid of them. Hold on. Good Lord.
Listen, I know I got a lot of expensive swords, and I'm choosing a Chinese mass production. What is the one I like? But you dogs are going to have to deal with that, okay?
My dogs are American made, son. America. They buy American made. Oh, well, and here they come. Hey, Tucker. Hey, Lola.
Joe,
go ahead. I'm sorry.
That's the one I happen to like the most, right? Is I like the balance, and there's just something nifty about it to me that strikes a chord for reasons that even as much as I ramble, I can't quite explain, right?
Gotcha.
As I talk about what do I practice with, the Motohara is what I tend to, if I'm going to the dojo and I'm not practicing with something that I need to test or kind of play with to be able to gather an opinion on, then I usually grab those blades. There's one for cutting, the LMC, and the other, it's a Tencho style blade. I don't know what geometry it is, but it's very noisy and well balanced, and I enjoy moving it, and it does Iaido and that kind of thing pretty well, and it's a very comfortable experience to do practitioner stuff with, because that's really the intention behind it. That's really what they focus on. So that's what I use for that stuff. And then as I look at like which ones are the prettiest, I have an Anthony de Cristofano blade that I did a review on, and I really think that is spectacular looking. I really like the sword. It's both kind of in a size that I like and has all sorts of cool metallurgical nonsense going on in it. So as like, what's the prettiest one I have? That one. Which one should I probably grab from the house if there's a fire? Is probably that one.
That one. Gotcha.
But I did recently start a Twitch channel because I play video games and I'm a big nerd. And if you want to watch me play video games, then I'm doing that shit anyway. So might as well stream it. And if you want to ask me sword questions while I do it, that's fine. But generally speaking, I don't know if it's exactly a great match, because I don't think that it fits well on that platform. But the simple thing is I enjoy talking about swords and I like playing video games. And so I'm giving a shot to see how well they mix at the moment. I might try doing some other stuff on Twitch. It's kind of a fun, like you just go out and film it live and then it goes away in a while, and it doesn't have to be a production. So I'm giving it a try. I'll see how it works. And if it's something that's both easy for me and meaningful in terms of connecting with people that might be interested in what I ramble about.
I think it's personally a really good idea. I mean, as far as people being able to, I don't know how you could keep focus and answer questions at the same time. That's kind of difficult to do.
Once you die, you answer the questions.
Yeah, it is.
Unfortunately, there's not a lot of people asking them. So
once you lose your guy and you're kind of out of think, all right, so let's get back to the questions now.
Once you lose the game, you toss out a couple expletives, and then you look at what you talk about swords, and it brings you right back up.
What is it that you love about European swords?
They're sharp and shiny, and they're swords. So of course I like them, and I like European swords and Filipino swords, and anything that's sharp and shiny. There's chances I'm gonna like it, but European swords, unlike some of the stuff in the Philippines, like as I try to research Compulon, I find it a lot more difficult to find smiths and their lineage and and how they were used, and kind of novels written about them, and lots of community around them and how they're talked about and stuff. But with European swords, there's a lot of research. There's stuff you can go see in museums. There's it's in artwork, and it's a mature hobby. I suppose I would say. And that's why maybe I talk about them more, because they're more readily available and than other swords. But if I could research Filipino swords as much, I would do that. If I could do it with other cultures, then I would. There are some exceptions. Like, I think Vikings are awesome, but I don't really like swords. I mean, I think they're beautiful and they're swords and they're awesome and I like them. But like when I hold them, I'm like, nah, I don't like it.
Right. Scab, obviously, as you know, he has a passion for knife craft. He demonstrates that really extremely well in all of his videos. He has a particular fondness for cold steel. Okay. Now, Scab, you love cold steel. You love their knives.
Absolutely.
You love what they do, and I do too. How would you classify cold steel swords?
Bad.
Yeah.
I'm trying to be succinct per your earlier request. So,
Yeah.
I mean, there's certainly nuance and context to it. And I think it's also fair to point out that that Cold Steel is contracting another company to make their swords, and they work with multiple people to do that. So the people making their Japanese swords, I've disclosed my kind of biases around some of their products, and I've only had their kind of legacy stuff.
Right.
So the Emperor, the Dragonfly, and the Warrior. And I've held all three, and up until the very last one that I did, and sword friend Arthur sent me a sword to play with, and the Cold Steel Warrior was lighter than I remembered it, and it wasn't as bad as I recall. And in researching, it seems like some of the legacy models may have been heavier, and maybe they refined the spec to them, and it wasn't as bad. But still, it's tough for me to look at what Cold Steel is selling and what you can get out of a mass production forge in China and see how they're similar. But it seems like they're not giving you as much for your money. And then there's certainly a lot of people that have some pretty well documented issues with the build quality, regardless of what you think of the company or any other thing. It's just what they put out is sometimes a little heavier than it should be, and sometimes it's a little more damaged out of the box than it should be. They're European swords, and I imagine some of the other stuff are made by different forges. So you might have depending on what sword you have from them, you might have very different experience. But I would think their knives are probably more either in-house made or more consistent. I don't have a lot of Cold Steel knives, but I've got a couple, and I would say that I like the SRK Sanmai blade, the knife that I have from Cold Steel, more than I like any sword I've ever held from them. And I'm a sharp, shiny thing guy, not just a sword guy. But certainly, to your point, Joe, my preference is the katana. It's where I'm certainly more interested, or the most interested, and then swords, and then we can go to knives.
Then we go to knives.
So to say that is certainly meaningful to me, that if you put all of the Cold Steel swords on a table and then put this Sanmai SRK on the table, I'd pick that SRK.
Yeah.
Perfect.
So would I. Absolutely. Absolutely. And I take no offense at that. I don't fall down at Lynn Thompson's feet. They make bangers. That's what they do. They make backyard cutting, and they do the videos, and they're phenomenal for that. If I want to go cut a bunch of shit in the woods, I'll take it out. But I think anybody that owns a Cold Steel sword, if they don't know, they should know it doesn't compare. And everybody kind of knows that. And the SRK, I've got one in Sanmai 20 CV SK5. I love that knife. I've got one in arm's length. It's awesome.
Pardon the noise here, but yeah, absolutely. I even was sitting on my table. Yeah, this, and at a glance, like it seems, dumb. Like it's Sanmai. Okay, but why? And the grip is rubbery, and the shape is like, all right, what do you want to be here? Because you're like, you're a fighter, you bush, what are you trying to do? But once you get it in your hand, like this, there's something special about it. Like I was, when I got this thing, I was like, I'm going to sell it because it's dumb. And then I held it in my hand. I was like, I don't want to now. So, yeah, there's something special about this. I do happen to like it. It's a special knife.
Guys, I want to really thank you. There was a pre-video that I put out introducing Matthew coming on to Play Talk, and I had made a request out for anyone who had questions for Matthew. And I'm very thankful for the ones who posted comments and posted questions for Matthew. So I can't get to all of them, guys, because there's a time restraint here. But I am going to try to tackle as many as I can. 2 questions I have here, and this is by no means, it has no special preference for the fact that this is actually Scab's lovely wife, but I digress. It's the 2 questions I have here. The first 2 questions I have here are from Megatron. So, question for Matthew. Matthew, what is the most expensive blade you have held, and what is it worth?
So, I would say that probably the most expensive blade would be priceless. And some of the stuff at the Oakshott Institute is arguably in that, the other day I got to go there and hold a Viking sword, right? And it was owned by Ewart Oakshott, and it was part of his collection, and it was re-hilted. And so you can hold it and like feel what this Viking sword felt like. It's 1,000 years old and it's a rusty pile, but most of it's still there, and it still gives you a semblance of what it was. And I don't know what something like that would cost to be, having been owned by one of the foremost experts in the subject, and to be held from his collection and be able to hold it. So if you were to sell it, I have no idea, but I'd imagine, in the priceless line of things is what comes to mind. Maybe that's not true. I don't know what the going rate is for those types of objects, but there's a bunch of other stuff that they have in their collection, from medieval stuff, which is less common and therefore probably more expensive. And so, having held a lot of the things at the Oakshott Institute, or at least a number of them having been in my hands at some point, then I would say probably one of those that I can quantify or that's been on the market. I've gotten to hold, the name is escaping me, and Joe will send it to you, but Kanaido, a member of the Jitetsu, so a Japanese swordsmith that was one of Masamune's 10 disciples. And so I'm probably saying the name wrong, but it was, I believe, called the Jitetsu, and they're the disciples of, one of the most famous swordsmiths. And among his most skilled disciples was this guy, and I got to hold a sword he made, hundreds and hundreds of years ago. So seeing that in like a finished polish, and I guess if you say like the most expensive sword, singular, versus how much have you held in swords. I went to a collector's house once, and I won't name names for the purpose of the video, but he's, said, "Hey, I want to see your stuff. I'm a stranger from the internet." And he said, "All right, come over here." And he opened a safe, and he was like, "You're a big guy. Stick your arms there." And he proceeded to load this sword in my hand and another. And I walked over to a table, probably about $500,000 of swords in my hands.
Wow.
Okay. And I'm just holding and kind of walking around like, okay, don't fucking trip. And then we lay down, and he proceeds to kind of explain the various differences between the swords and kind of what to look at. And most of it now and at the time were over my head. But that would probably be the explanation in terms of, granted, I can't just answer it simply, Joe. So there's the priceless, and then there's the quantifier.
And the quantifier.
Hopefully that did it.
Gotcha. Megatron, you also had asked, what is your favorite blade in your home collection? So we kind of answered that as well for you. Captain Electro, hey, Cap, his question for you is, what are his thoughts on modern swords like zombie tools and apocalyptic swords?
So I haven't played with the APOC swords, but I have had a zombie tools or two, and they are deceptively fun. I would have thought they were big, bulky, dumb things to feel in the hand. And having, I suppose, low expectations for something more clubbish, I was pleasantly surprised that they were, a bit overbuilt. I would say that they're a bit overbuilt.
Right. And
given their intended use, that was impressive. It was fun to move around, and they seemed like good products.
Now, the next question is actually, it's kind of curious, because I'm actually curious about this too. Paul Bezimer, thanks, Paul. He has, I'm going to try to sum it up what he asked you. I think he wanted to know your opinion about movie swords. Where do you buy reproductions, and is there any movie swords that you like best? And he also wants to know if you heard anything about the reproduction of the Snake Eyes sword coming up from the Snake Eyes movie. Like, what's your
reproduction of Snake Eyes sword? I have not heard anything. I have seen some reproductions of like the G.I. Joe swords, and back, you probably can't see it, but one of the things in those shadow boxes back there is the Storm Shadow figure from G.I. Joe. And so I do have, I was a grown ass man and bought a little toy for a lot of money and then stuck it in the shadow box in my office. Anyway, I I haven't seen, but I haven't been impressed, I guess, with the replicas of G.I. Joe type toys. They seem to be made of relatively inexpensive steels and be more for aesthetics and not purpose built for use, which is, I guess where my interests lie in collecting and reviewing. In terms of movie swords, where do I get them? Different manufacturers can make them. There's a couple that come to mind. So there's the Conan sword from Albion,
which I absolutely love.
It's made from the original molds. It's actually like a pound lighter, even though it's made from the original molds. And so you get the same things that were pretty much in the movie, and it's a terrible sword. I'll let you know.
I know that. For a memento for me as far, because Conan the Barbarian, that was actually where I started really getting into swords, was from that movie. And
it's a shame I took away the love of swords and not physical fitness, but I digress. The point is that Albion makes some movie swords. They're fantastic, but you pay a premium for them.
Right.
Hanwei has made some good ones too. They made there's a Stardust is a movie that I really enjoyed. It had some charm to it, and Tristan's sword was reproduced, I believe, by the Hanwei Forge, or at least it looked like that as far as I could tell. So there's depending on the movie of the day it comes out, and somebody might reproduce one that's good. The Princess Bride is another one that I think if you ask me what my favorite movie of all time is, as I would define it by like being able to watch it at any point in my life, at any stage in my life, with anyone in my life, and be entertained, would have to be that movie. And Inigo Montoya's sword is certainly a famous thing. And I haven't gotten a chance to see a good replica, but I have been so tempted to buy he's a smith in Scotland, and I reviewed a sword from Zorro from him, but his name is escaping me. Anyway, he makes a replica of the Inigo Montoya rapier. And it's like 1,200 Great pounds, not like, American pounds. You get what I'm saying?
Yes.
That British currency, right? So anyway, it's relatively expensive. But anyway, it looked like a fantastic sword. And I imagine somebody else might make one at some point, but that seems to be the only like really solid replica of that type of sword.
All right, so Paul, I think that pretty much answers your question. And thank you, Matt, for going in detail with all the questions. Thanks you for answering all the questions. Matt, that was fascinating. It was satisfying. No, it was satisfying for me. I got to tell you, because I've been wanting to ask you these questions on a one-on-one basis ever since I watched your first video. And I am thankful that I'm able to do that. And I know a lot of people might.
You never want to ask me another question again.
I'll be calling you once a week, Matt. You know that. I bust your chops all the time. So I thank you for spending the time with us, going into such detail with everything. I think this was incredibly useful, helping us know, the guy behind the swords a little bit, or at least have at least broaden up on the guy that's in front of us. So I appreciate it. And I hope you guys got a lot out of it. And Matthew, thank you. Thank you for being here. I really appreciate it.
You're welcome.
Scab, do you want to add anything?
No, I really appreciate you being here for a couple reasons. One, I made fun of Joe earlier. I do that quite a bit, but it means a lot to me that you're here, and I appreciate that. But it means so much to him.
It does.
And he's a brother and a friend, and I just want to say thank you for being here.
Thank you, Matt.
Now, Joe, send me my $10.
Absolutely. Without a doubt. Thank you, Matt. Thanks for being here. Guys, thanks for joining us in Blade Talk. Again, I'm going to try to leave whatever links we can into the descriptions of our YouTube channels, obviously Matthew's YouTube channel. And if you can be so kind and go in, subscribe to the channels, it'll really help us all grow together. And thank you for sticking with us throughout the entire interview. I hope you enjoyed it. I definitely did. And you guys have a great evening, great day, great night, depending on when you guys are watching it. Thanks for joining us at Blade Talk, guys. Have a good one, and peace out, everybody. Thanks.